Welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, my name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck podcast. Today is Thursday, March 24th, 2022. Joining me for today's podcast is tech journalism's triple threat. I got to change that phrase every time just to get you guys excited in the morning. Stewart Wolpin, who writes for Popular Mechanics, U.S. News, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other wonderful publications. Rob Pegoraro, who writes frequently on tech policy for Wirecutter, PC Magazine, and good old USA Today. And we can't forget John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. Gentlemen, good afternoon, and how is your Thursday going?
So far, so good.
Yes, so awesome.
I'm gonna start sending gift cards for coffee in the morning to get you guys excited in the morning. So I want to get right to our topics because I think they're really good topics. It's been kind of sort of a slow tech week, but that's always good. There's one topic that I'm sure that the three of my three compadres are going to really appreciate. But want to get those up on the screen real quick. Here, let me pull up the slides here. There we go. And you know, I cannot wait to get your opinion on each of this. But I'm sure you've been following this. You know, now that the M1 Ultra is kind of out there in the public space. You know, there are review units out there. The big publications now are actually reviewing the performance of the M1 Ultra, and lots and lots of very credible publications. You know, Tom's Hardware, The Verge, and other publications are kind of really taking Apple to task on some of the what they're calling misleading processor performance claims with the M1 Ultra that they made at the announcement event a few weeks ago. And I guess the question I got to start with, and I want to get each of your opinions on this, is why does Apple do this? I mean, it's you know, this is not the first time where, you know, they put up, you know, they make either the wrong compare to the wrong Intel processor or to the wrong graphics card. It's I think, you know, the NVIDIA 3090 is probably the best graphics card on the market, and they're saying, oh God, the M1 Ultra can blow the doors away from it using lower power. The question I have: why does Apple have to resort to that kind of behavior? Why can't, you know, they've accomplished so much with their silicon, and their silicon on its own merits is very, very strong, you know, especially because it's optimized for its operating system. So let me start with Rob. Rob, why do you think Apple just engages in this kind of like sleight of hand behavior that you would not associate with Apple and other topics? So what's your thoughts?
There are so many mysteries to this company. I mean, why does Apple keep grasping for every last dime it can extract out of the App Store when it has so much money it literally doesn't know what to do with it? You know, why bother? Let it go. You know, you can let some business escape. Yeah, you know, I guess but this is a problem throughout technology. You have startups that can't let go of the notion that they still have to do the same things that look a little different when you're the scrappy underdog that has to growth hack your way into relevance. But you can't keep doing that. Eventually you'll wind up getting it to look bad, or if you're really lucky, you can, you know, wind up getting under investigation for one thing or another.
Right. Yeah, it just floors me. Now, the Intels, the AMDs of the world, I mean, they've been in the processor business from day one. So not to say they have been, you know, they sometimes they don't make the same type of egregious mistakes, but they've lived in a benchmark world for virtually the histories of their company. So they're generally very, very tight when they're showing benchmark numbers because they want to back them up. So, John, let me tee this up with you. Is this just, you know, should Apple be taking the task, or is this just, hey, you know, this is Apple being Apple?
I think they should be taking the task, but you know, part of it is they have a long, you know, as Rob alluded to, this long history, and you just alluded to this long history of really being second banana, never quite technical enough, never quite fast enough, never quite, you know, and way too expensive. Yeah, you know, people love the way their shiny new toys look, but really, they're never cutting edge. You know, that's the rap against Apple, never cutting edge. And so they feel, you know, slighted by that. And as second, they kind of want to go, no, we're doing really well. Our chips are really fast. And So that's certainly one historical aspect of it. But the other part is too, I used to be, as these guys well know, the guy in the lab who benchmarked things, until midnight every night. And it was just, that's what you did with these chips. That stuff doesn't matter so much anymore. I mean, there are very few applications that it really counts. We're sort of exceeded the use of a smartphone or a desktop computer. Does it matter in autonomous cars? Yeah, it matters in autonomous cars. But, as far as if I'm rendering things to edit the next Netflix movie that I just got a contract for on my Apple, my Mac, it probably doesn't matter that much. I mean, that's the chip they gave me. I don't really have a choice either. It's not like the old days when it was like AMD and Intel and which chip is faster and should you get this desktop computer. If you're on a Mac, you don't have a choice. So, it's not such a big deal.
Yep. Well, the interesting thing is, as you know, John, because, the three of you, but including you, John, benchmarks, depending on how you execute the benchmark, you can get benchmarks to say different things,
Right.
and depending on the applications you load, what's the compare, what's the configuration of the system. A lot of times that happens where you can, you benchmark a system with a smaller load of memory, more storage, which affects overall performance. And again, like you said, the performance levels of processors today of all different brands have taken off so enormously. I mean, Intel has done an incredible job with the new Alder Lake stuff that's been out, that's getting rave reviews. But it's really harder and harder to demonstrate a really high, a performance peak. Now, Apple's also saying, by the way, not only do our processors perform very well, but because they're ARM based, they also do it on a dramatically lower level of power, which is, again, that's another attribute that's coming into this conversation. I don't think the average consumer, really doesn't appreciate. But Stewart, what's your thoughts on this? You always have an energetic opinion on topics like that, and I'd love to ping your brain on what you think.
Well, thanks for raising expectations beyond any reasonable level. But my initial thought on this is, to paraphrase Claude Rains from Casablanca, I'm shocked.
Oh, here we go.
Exaggerating or creating misleading claims. I have a little show and tell here.
Yes, sir.
This is an Apple Newton that's being lost in the haze. Apple is not unlike every other tech company extant. It is I think the three of us, or the four of us, what we do as our number one job is to debunk manufacturer claims. This is our job. And this is the job of the tech media. So what Apple is, and of course, we always hope that when we do this, that companies will begin to behave themselves. But considering this has been going on since Edison invented the light bulb, you're going to get companies who are going to lie, mislead, hyperbolize about the capabilities of their products. I'm working on 3 different review roundups right now. One on digital picture frames, one on rechargeable AA batteries. Oh, excitement. And one on self-emptying vacuum cleaners. And I am finding that all of them have misleading claims. For one thing, self-emptying vacuum cleaners are not self-emptying. They're merely delayed emptying.
Damn it.
Rechargeable batteries put out 1.2 volts versus single-use batteries 1.5 volts. But the rechargeable battery company, they'll replace any single-use battery. No, they won't. Not in every circumstance. Digital picture frames claim a lot of their frames have 2K resolution, which is just flat out lie. So this is, a company has misrepresented their technology. Thursday. It's just another day in tech world.
Right. Well, only you could bring up a Casablanca quote during one of the podcasts, and I do appreciate that cinematic reference. That's great. The only thing I'll say about this, so we can move on to the next topic, is that this really is an important topic. You really have to have good transparency and good honesty when you're reporting benchmarks. I get it that all kinds of manufacturers make all kinds of claims, and it's up to, established journalists like you guys to, point that out. But keep in mind, not every consumer, reads Tom's Hardware or reads PC Gamer or some of the other prestigious publications that do a lot of great work on processor performance. And, I've even gotten pings from people, and I can't believe this. I wrote about this morning on my newsletter. I've got people pinging me saying, hey, money's not an object because a Mac Studio M1 Ultra, if you configure it the right way, we were talking about this last week, could be like $7,000 if you go crazy. But I've got some people saying, hey, can I use it for gaming? Because of their performance claims. And nobody in their right mind would ever buy a Mac Studio with an M1 Ultra. I don't care how high-end you configure it for gaming for a whole bunch of other reasons. But those processor claims that they made, the performance claims they made at the announcement event, to the unsuspecting consumer, they might say, why not go crazy? Hey, why not go for the gusto? And I'll have a great, Mac platform, and I can play games at the same time, not considering the fact that there's a lot of reasons why you don't really want to use a Mac platform for gaming. But having said that, let's move on to the next topic here, because we can talk this one to death here. And that is talking about outer space. Hey, Rob, apparently I believe there was a conference that you attended, if I'm not mistaken, that this is
yes,
becoming a bigger issue. So let's tee this up, because I want to get, for the holidays, I want to get Stewart a gift card for some private space travel, and
it's going to be a large gift card,
$250,000 gift card.
Right.
No, that's not even enough. But we'll see. So I spent Monday and Tuesday at Satellite 2020 conference at the convention center downtown, and there was a lot of discussion about private space travel, which right now is the province of 3 companies. And problem number 1 is only one actually has a published fare. That would be Virgin Galactic, where $450,000. Right. You don't want to take out a home equity line of credit, will get you a seat on their suborbital space plane, which I should note has had
for a 10-minute flight, right? Isn't it like 10 minutes?
One successful test flight with people on board featuring Richard Branson. Blue Origin, their 4th launch with people on board, again suborbital, that's supposed to happen March 29th. They don't actually have a published number, but if you have to ask, you won't want to know. And then, of course, SpaceX, they have a launch scheduled April 3rd, which will send a crew of 4 to the International Space Station, the first all-private mission to the ISS. We do know that the 3 passengers, the 4th one is a VP at this company, Axiom, that has bought the mission, paid $55 million each, which I cannot get a home equity line of credit anything close to that. But there's interesting stuff going on. Number 1, the fact that you have multiple companies, some of which, Virgin Galactic, I'm not sure about their financial model. They don't really have a line of business. Blue Origin, they're building a very large rocket, the New Glenn, that will be capable of basically flying almost any payload NASA could possibly order up. They're building engines for United Launch Lines, which already has a launch business of its own for the DoD and private companies. And of course, SpaceX has been fabulously successful and is right now eating the Russians' lunch, since they've decided to stage a temper tantrum and remove themselves from the business of launching commercial satellites. Number 2, NASA is actually working. They've successfully privatized space travel, which has worked out incredibly well. And we can all thank Elon Musk for giving the United States the freedom to tell the Russians to go screw off, since we don't need them to take astronauts to and from the ISS anymore. NASA wants the ISS's replacement to also be a private enterprise project, where it would just basically be one of many tenants. And so the space agency signed word about $400 million in change in funding in December to 3 companies that are working on different projects. So all of those would in fact allow for private space travel. Remains to be seen just how many Marriott or Hyatt points you would need to book a room. I assume it would be all of them. But a guy can dream, right?
If anybody has enough frequent flyer miles, Rob, it's you. Okay, if you don't have enough frequent flyer miles
on the West Coast, I've got to really. Plus, without an award chart, it's really hard to know how much you should save up.
So, Rob, before I get John to weigh in on this, the question I have for you, we're all familiar with the age-old phrase, price elasticity. The lower the price is, the more demand there is for a product. Where do you think the price has to be to really for this become quasi-mainstream? Meaning that there's a long, right now it's really celebrities, people who can swing that amount. The actor from SNL, Pete Davidson, if I'm not mistaken. I think isn't he going on Blue Origin?
No, he canceled the flight because they had
canceled. Like if he had a schedule conflict, that's ridiculous, dude. You clear your schedule to go to space.
Right. I was a little surprised at that. Also.
Yeah, he was getting a haircut.
Come on, wasn't it the urine test before he goes on the flight? I mean, I assume. Right?
No, it's the tattoo test that showed up on radar.
Department. So it's interesting.
Is there a price elasticity thing?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was at South by Southwest, there was one exhibit by a company called Worldview, which is advertising going to the edge of space. It's actually taking a balloon up to 100,000 feet, which is not actually close to the edge of space, but is basically at the very top of the stratosphere where the sky is a deep black and you do see the Earth's curvature. They would charge $50,000 for a seat, and you'd actually have a long time to enjoy it. So even if there's no weightlessness, you spend more time up there. There's a company called Zero G, which basically lets you experience weightlessness in a 727 flying this parabolic path.
Right,
Same way astronauts train for weightlessness. They charge $7,000, and clearly Zero G can make a business out of that. And look, like I myself spent $450 last September to spend 30 minutes flying in a 1945 vintage B-25 bomber. And I think that was money very well spent. So there's definitely a market. I think, if I could spend $10,000 on a suborbital flight to space, yeah, I would make room for that. We've all had our indulgences. When it's stuck in a six-figure territory, that's not a mass market thing, but you got to get there somewhere. Everyone at this panel on space tourism at this conference basically said this is a matter of scale. You fly more and more as you have other businesses that let you, get this thing spinning up. It's the whole, you're a startup, you're pushing a flywheel, eventually it spins on its own. And so the cost, maybe it drops from $450,000 at Virgin Galactic to $250,000, maybe with Blue Origin, if they drop to $1 million to $500,000. It's really hard to say. It certainly helps that the three billionaires behind these companies, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, have a lot of money, especially Bezos and Musk. So they can afford to eat some losses for a little while.
So, John, are you coughing up to 450 to go on the next trip, John?
No, I mean, it's funny that you asked that question. In consumer electronics, the price was always like around $200. Whenever you hit a device, it was $200. Boom, it would take off.
It's mainstream, right?
Right. Computer equipment is about $500. The computer that you always want is about $2,000. And that has remained steady for, 30 years or something like that. I think the price here, the price they often talk about is about $250,000. I remember when they were talking about this before, and the guys from Blue Origin and stuff were saying, and from Virgin were saying, but we think, very quickly the price is going to come down from $400 and some odd thousand dollars to $250,000. So that was sort of their consumer electronics $200 mark. Was that going to get a lot of people? There's probably a lot of 1%ers who will go on it. Yeah, I'm sure that would happen. But I'm more intrigued by the literal moonshot. And, SpaceX right now sort of has that wrapped up. But after NASA said they were going to use more than one company, now they've just come out and said, this week, we will use two. And they are going to bring another company on board to take people to the moon. So I think I'm more intrigued by that. The idea of seeing the curvature of space, what Rob describes as taking up in the balloon, which is basically like a weather balloon that you're taking up, is great.
It's really comfortable seats and everything. It looks comfortable on the mock-up at South by.
I know, but you said you got lots more time to enjoy it. And what struck me is, or be totally terrified by it.
Well, that'll help with the anxiety.
Right. I like the short trip. It's like, even if you're terrified, you're coming down soon. So it's going to be over soon.
The question I've got for Stewart, and Stewart, you'll remember, I think knowing you'll remember this, is that Disney, and I want to say it was either Disneyland or maybe it was Disney World, they had a ride, long retired about 20 years ago. I think they got rid of it. It was called Mission to Mars.
Yes.
And you got into a of course it was like 25 or 30 people, got into what looked like a space capsule, and they simulated a launch to Mars. They had hydraulics. It was kind of like a a very, very primitive version of a flight simulator that they used to train pilot, but it was very effective, you know. And I'm surprised, and maybe Disney's planning things like that because they have rides that provide an immersive experience using other types of means. That to me would be really interesting. That if you could simulate on the ground without taking off, even with $500 or $1,000 for a very extensive 20-minute, hey, here's what a launch from Earth really feels like. God knows with video resolution, you could do all kinds of incredible things. Frankly, you can't simulate lack of gravity, but nevertheless, although you might be able to simulate that with 3D capability, you know, with 3D video.
The metaverse is not going to replace space travel. Come on.
That's not the same thing. So, Stuart, what's your thoughts? I know you're not going to pay the $500,000.
Good question. Which would be more likely to make you throw up, VR or spaceflight?
Once you know the real thing is available, the fake becomes far less desirable. I mean, I remember going to CES 20, 25 years ago. What used to be the Hilton Hotel used to have a Star Trek ride.
Yes,
which I took, which was really cool. You know, I mean, you got into a space, you know, the or the space shuttle Galileo, and it took you around, and it had, you know, the hydraulics and the, you know, the 360-degree screens, and it was quite an effective experience for what was, you know, the mid 1990s. But now that we know you can actually go into space, I think these sort of approximations, psychologically, you know, it's cool, but it ain't the real thing, and I want the real thing. My second thought on this is, as much as I would love to go on one of these rides, this is going to sound incredibly ridiculous on his face, I'm holding out for orbital flights. You know, I mean, what we remember about NASA, we remember John Glenn far more than we remember Alan Shepard. And what most people don't remember about John Glenn is that we remember John Glenn because he was the first American, not the first human, the first American in orbit, where Alan Shepard simply took one of these flights that these billionaires are giving away or selling. That's what they're doing. They're approximating what Al Shepard did. So I think the experience that John Glenn had is where, maybe not price-wise, but certainly could be a breaking point to break this kind of idea or expense into the mainstream. Because once people can go up into orbit and spend a day circling around the planet, experiencing sunrise and sunset within an hour or an hour and a half, I think that will just blow away the kinds of experiences that are right now being sold for $500 million. So I think these are really interesting, and it's like anything else in technology. You start off with something that's very, very cool, but you know, if you just focus your future binoculars and look into the future, that the next step is orbital flights. And I think that's what's really going to capture the public imagination and maybe really start, or even trips to the space station. That's, I think, will really capture people's imaginations in a way that simply going up for 10 minutes can't.
Well, we've got to move on to the next topic, but I'm sure those orbital flights will include the kind of experience that Rob is looking for, which apparently includes throwing up. So we'll make sure that
zero gravity adaptation. It's tough, man. I've read about it at least.
Well, hey, listen. So the next topic is really important. They're kind of related, 3 and 4, and you know, Stuart, this is something that you brought up because there are some really profound technology aspects of what we're seeing in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. You know, the thing I want to just start you off with, Stuart, as you kind of opine on this, is the Russian militaries had such kind of a mythical reputation. You know, 4 or 5 weeks ago, there was this feeling they were going to roll into Ukraine and they were going to be raising the Russian flag over Kiev, and they weren't going to. I don't think anybody believed they were going to be greeted with flowers and in a welcoming type of way. But it's so shocking the way the Russian military forces perform, and certainly technology has been part of this. But I guess the question that I want you to address right off the bat: have we been overestimating the sophistication and robustness of Russian technology for the last 40 years? It kind of feels like that. But anyway, let me get you to jump in.
Well, I have two aspects of this. One is the Russian military aspect of it, which in a kleptocracy, what apparently has happened that they allocated all of these funds to the Russian military to improve the military, and the money was stolen. And I think the funniest story is the one I sent you was that they're using quote unquote encrypted radios as part of their military operation, and the Ukrainians are just listening in so they know everything that they're going to do. But I think the more critical aspect on this, as far as I'm concerned, is the other side, which is the information war. And the last time that we discussed this, we talked about the robustness of the internet and how the internet, even I discussed that the internet would help sway Russian opinion. And to a certain extent, that is still working, but obviously Putin and his cronies have been managing to really shut off the spigot to Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and that sort of thing. And it reminded me that back in the 1980s, and I'm wondering if anybody else has thought of doing this, is resorting to what we used to call the sneaker net. Back in the 80s, I worked for a guy whose wife was Latvian. And this was just before the breakup of the Soviet Union. And in order to get information on what was actually going on in Latvia and in the Soviet Union to sort of shut down the information, she would get me, and again, this is the mid-80s, so the VCR is still a new device. And she got me, and she knew I was a tech geek. And so she got me boxes of pre-recorded Disney tapes. And I would tape over the record tab, and those of you old enough to remember what I'm talking about, I had dual VCRs, and I recorded CNN news broadcasts on these Disney tapes. I would then take the tape off the record tab, give her back the tapes, they would re-shrink wrap them, and send them to Latvia, with the authorities none the wiser for how information was leaking into the country. And so I'm just wondering whether or not the same kind of sneaker net can be deployed using thumb drives or DVDs to get information to people whose internet service is being cut off in Russia, and especially older people who may not be internet savvy to begin with. So I think that there may be other methods, old school methods, other than the internet, to try to get information to the information starved in Russia to try to continue stir discontent inside that country.
There is, in fact, a campaign called Flash Drives for Freedom that collects used flash drives. We all have like a drawer full of these things from press kits, right?
Boxes.
Basically, load them up with Korean language content and have them smuggled into North Korea. They had a great little display. I've seen them at multiple trade shows. It's this sort of, big board full of cartoon pictures of Kim Jong-un with a USB port for his mouth. So you take out the flash drive, you don't want any more, stick it in his mouth, and then they'll go to town, package it up, fill it up with like the Korean language Wikipedia, K-pop songs, South Korean soap operas, whatever. So yes, what you're talking about absolutely does happen. Just until recently, you could assume that people in Russia would be able to tune into things, on an internet that was more open than in China or North Korea, for that matter.
Right. Right. But, the satellite phones are sort of the critical device right now, at least for journalists. But, you've got to charge them, and power is an issue. So the other thing is, I don't know, you guys have probably tested them as well. I've got a slew of these solar chargers, right? They fan out and they have a solar array on them, but they take direct sunlight, and it takes hours to recharge a cell phone. And as one journalist, a Canadian journalist, I was reading his diary, basically, and he was describing how, look, I can't really go outside. I'm hungered down, it's being bombed, and the brief moments that I can go outside here to report on it, I'm taking pictures and doing things. I can't really sit there for hours with a cell phone trying to charge it. So power is probably their biggest challenge right now in terms of this. I mean, the technology, I'm still, it still looks like Tony Stark stuff to me. I know it's been around quite a while in Afghanistan. It did terrific damage against invading forces in Afghanistan. And these are these Javelin and Stingers. The Javelin is the anti-tank weapon, and the Stinger is, surface to air. You basically line it up on a touch screen, and then you target the vehicle, touch it, fire it, and then you run away. I mean, you don't even have to be anywhere around once it hits the target. And that means that the Russians, and the same with Americans, we're just as vulnerable. Anybody's as vulnerable. We can't target the person who fired it. So I think it's this high-tech guerrilla warfare, super high-tech guerrilla warfare that's really starting to work for them.
Drones too.
Yeah.
Well,
But
yeah. Go ahead. No, well, because I want to hit the next topic because we only have a few minutes left here. Is that do you really think that now that Putin and his wonderful team of generals and military are sitting back after 4 weeks saying, you know what, this is not going as well as we thought it would be. We're kind of stuck in a quagmire here in Ukraine I guess where I'm going with this is their technology and the military effort in general, their military capability now turning out to be so primitive that they know they could never beat the NATO and the United States in a conventional fashion, meaning that if that ever came to just a conventional war, we really could blow the doors out of them, out of Ukraine very, very quickly using conventional means, us and NATO. And does that backfire in the sense that if I'm Putin and I know that I cannot win conventionally, that I have to use something desperate, escalation, de-escalate theory that's bouncing around, which apparently is established Russian military doctrine. So, Stuart, I'll just give you the last comment on that. Does this kind of backfire in that sense that it actually pushes Putin into a corner?
Well, I think that's obvious, and I think that's really what the West is afraid of. But I think, as I mentioned the last time we talked about this subject, that new wars are always fought with old technology, and new technology only, it's sort of like survival of the fittest. The new technology comes out, and the side that has the newest technology almost always wins. As I mentioned the last time, the repeating rifle in the Civil War turned the tide for the North as much as black soldiers did. But I think in this particular case, I think the technology within Russia itself, the information war to try to erode Putin's popularity from within, I think is a key technology differentiator here. I think that he is counting on keeping the lid on, and the longer this goes, the more opportunities there are for people in the West, including Ukrainians and Russians themselves, to get the word out to people who are not getting the news, essentially. That whole rally that Putin put on, he spoke for 5 minutes. I mean, I was really shocked at the Western coverage of that of Putin's event made it seem like that it was gone on for hours. He spoke for 5 minutes. And the news also, I don't think, really spoke about how people were either coerced into going or told that there was a concert and didn't know that he was going to be speaking. So I think that the key technology here is the information war, and the longer this goes on, the more Putin's support is going to erode from within his own country.
Putin's public
diplomacy, his
sales efforts, it makes the Iraqi information minister look like Charles Foster Kane.
Yeah, really.
Another movie reference. We got to hit the last topic, but it's just been fascinating from that perspective. And just remember, if you do get invited to a stadium with Putin speaking, you probably want to accept that invitation. You probably don't want to turn that down. So let's hit that the last topic, but this one I think is important to all of you. Is that Stuart, you were kind of we were talking before online. Is that with all the crazy supply chain stuff going on, we got a war going on in Europe. You kind of might expect that OLED prices for TVs might be staying the same or going up. But in fact, to the point you made to me, via email earlier, that now you seem to be getting some indications that, hey, TVs later in the years actually might be coming down. So thoughts on that?
The new Sony OLED TV is $3,000. So obviously Sony is trying to keep these up. The problem I think is twofold. The first is that the fact that TV prices in general, especially LCD TV prices, had dropped so dramatically, so quickly. The whole idea behind 4K was to give these TV makers a new profit center by increasing the profit margin over 2K TVs. And that lasted for about 3 seconds. And so I think what LG and Sony are trying to do are carve out a premium space. The problem that they're having is that mini LED and other non-OLED technologies are beginning to really close the quality gap with OLED, which is going to make a $25,000 or a $3,000 OLED TV not worth the money when you can buy a mini LED TCL for $1,000 that has almost as good black levels. So I think the problem that these companies, I think their wallets are in the right place. They want to maintain profit margin and they want to maintain profitability by carving out the kind of premium space that Apple has carved out for itself. But it's getting harder and harder to justify shelling out even that kind of money. And I had an occasion to speak to an LG TV executive, and I asked them flat out, you're selling, LG Display is selling a lot more of these panels, maybe not in the US, but certainly around the world. So the price has to be coming down on them in order, just from a volume standpoint. So aren't you artificially keeping your prices up to maintain margin? And the answer was Ralph Cramden, humana, humana, humana. So I think that they're going to have to have a come to Jesus moment on this when they realize that they cannot justify a 2.5 or 3x price delta on their sets when a consumer can go out and buy an almost as good set now for less than $1,000.
So John, you're a TV aficionado and on a variety of different levels. Your thoughts on the coming collapse of OLED prices, I guess?
I test a lot of TVs. I have a basement full of TVs. I have 8K TVs, which I actually like. And I think, you're going to be seeing 8K TVs. But OLED is still far and away better than anything on the market, any other technology, except for micro LEDs, which are not mini LEDs, nobody can afford micro LEDs right now. So they don't really have any competition. I mean, if you put them side by side, OLED still kills it, man. It's way more intense colors, just, so many levels. So they have that position. So Stewart's right. So why should I drop my prices? There's no real point. They also have another issue, which is weight. So shipping these darn things across the ocean or anything is a horrific amount of money now. It's more than 15 times what it cost before the pandemic. So these are really heavy sets, and they're way heavier than LCD sets. So that in and of itself means the price is gonna hold steady at some point, as long as those shipping costs are like they are. That makes it impossible. And 8K sets, I mean, I pushed one up my stairs in my house all by myself, and it was like 100 pounds or something. It's even heavier.
My friend Sisyphus.
Yeah, so it's even heavier. So the cost is going to stay there. But Stuart's also right, in mentioning, look, before the pandemic, all these prices continually dropped every year steadily, 20%, 25%, down. And since this has all happened, the chip shortages and supply chain, all bets are off. So who knows what people will be paying at Christmas time,
So Rob, take us home on this. And then I know you're a big, you've been questioning 8K for quite some time.
It's great.
Trying to rationalize. Got to go out and buy one. But, how do you kind of conflate those two topics plus the OLED topic? And I mean, even taking the OLED portion out of that, 8K, it's still hard to rationalize it is a better picture, but it's the delta and the content availability. We've talked about this before. It's harder and harder to justify in that context. So any thoughts before we
8K is no suborbital space flight, that's for sure. I would say, remember, I've got a picture of a space shuttle launch on the wall behind me. I would break it down this way. For those of you who aren't video connoisseurs, who don't get hung up, who have to remember what OLED stands for in the first place, this is all good news, because the more competition there is at the high end, the cheaper things get at sets that are just good TVs that, are a mere 50 or 60 inches and already are under $1,000. They'll just get lower, cheaper and cheaper. So let the video files have at it, let the competition drive down prices at the top. And there really is a trickle down effect in consumer electronics in this way.
Yeah. The same is true, with wireless headphones. I mean, there's so many good wireless headphones on the market, and the prices have been coming down. that it's harder and harder for the Boses of the world and even Apple with their high-end AirPod Max to say, you know what, this is a little bit better than what you've had before. And especially when those products are sold like TVs in a retail environment, where retail is probably the worst place to buy a TV because of fluorescent lighting, and it doesn't, doesn't simulate a living room environment as well. I mean, some like Magnolia in Best Buy, they try to do kind of a living room thing, but that's not very common at every Best Buy store across the country. So it's harder and harder to rationalize this premium experience, whether it's an 8K TV or whether it's an OLED display. So I think you're right. So anyway, I think that's about all the time we've got, because we've got to get Mr. Rob to his next little meeting here. So let me just conclude by saying thanks for taking the time. Yeah, you'll have a lot to talk about that next week, Rob. But guys, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guy. If you haven't already, please make a donation to the Red Cross or your preferred charitable organization to help the brave people of Ukraine in their time of need. And until next time, everybody, have a great week.